All right. Thank you guys so much for showing up. This is so cool. And just before we get going, I just want to say a huge thank you to this entire community, people showing up on their Saturdays, watching all the videos, making all these things possible. I mentioned it in this last video for the Restore and Protect that we get to do this because you guys watch. It's so funny. Just again, I give you a little heads up what's coming. We've got some lab test results coming from one of the major independent research labs in the entire world, that we went down there about a month ago and spent a week down there doing a whole bunch of tests. And we got the test results back and everything. It was $20,000 worth of testing. The only reason we can do that is because you awesome people keep watching these videos, and we can take that YouTube ad revenue, all those annoying ads that pop up, right? We take that ad revenue and we spend it to go create really cool, fun stuff that we get to share with you guys. This is the coolest thing in the whole world, and then we get to have great guys like Chip, right? And so I don't want to make you wait any longer. Let's bring Chip on, because this is so cool to be able to do. Good morning, Chip. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great, Lake. Glad to be with the community once again.
No, this is going to be fantastic. We got some really cool stuff. So, okay, everybody sitting in the chat, I want to say two things real quick, right? One, I'm going to try to give you a couple little answers to some of the stuff that I've seen in there already, but because Chip has a ton of data for us today, we're not going to be able to probably respond to comments as we go like we did before, because we'll be here literally all day. And sooner or later I got to get home and help my wife do stuff, right? Because I was gone all week. So anyway, to answer some of the questions, because there was a whole bunch of questions about the Valvoline Restore and Protect video. Now, obviously, what we focused on in the video from last week was the results from the engine that ran on conventional Valvoline 5W30 for 500,000 miles. And so just a couple quick things here about that. So those engines are Ford EcoBoost. I think they are the 2.2. I don't know which one they were. But it's the same engine chip that runs the Sequence 9 and Sequence 10 LSPI tests and the chain wear test. And all those miles that they were accumulated were on the chassis dyno, which you would remember from your time at Afton, because they have to have those chassis dynos to run the EPA fuel economy tests.
Indeed.
So one of the questions I had been asked, or we've seen over and over again, is, well, what was that driving cycle? What they did is they just repeated the EPA driving cycle over and over and over again.
Wow.
It took them, I think, a year and a half or something.
That's a lot of fuel.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, fortunately, they're in Ashland. They're right down the street from the refinery. Oh, you know what? And that's a really good point too, by the way, about the fuel.
Yeah.
One of the things about the fuel is those engines did run on essentially premium fuel.
I hope so.
So I know a lot of people were like, an EcoBoost, 500,000 miles?
Yeah,
that's impossible. Well, if you have, they did 10,000 mile oil changes.
Okay.
Right. So they did every 10,000 miles, they changed the oil. But they also used premium fuel the entire time. And then they replaced whatever other parts. I think they had one of the ones, the conventional oil, they had to replace the catalytic converter, I think, twice during that time. Yep, just because of the higher volatility and all that, right? And then I think that one of them had a water pump or something like that. It wasn't like both of them ran for 500,000 miles without any issues at all. But there were no internal issues in the engine, right? So that was the piece. And then one of the other parts of that is, people, like, one engine ran on synthetic, one engine ran on conventional. We focused our results on the one that was, conventional, because that's the one that had 7 stuck rings, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's the one where you saw the biggest delta in performance. The engine that did run on synthetic did have a stuck ring.
Okay.
After 500,000 miles. And of course, then run and restore and protect, it unstuck the ring. So it really is a fair test in terms of somebody like, synthetic oil, it is going to clean up. No, putting in just any synthetic oil after conventional oil isn't going to unstick piston rings. That just doesn't really happen,
I believe you. And I've got some story to tell here that speaks to that.
All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into it, because we want to touch on that, just give that little background on that. So here, let's go ahead and you share your experience.
Well, I'd love to. And guys and gals on the call, I thought you might enjoy hearing a story about, can engine oil formulation actually affect fuel economy? We all speak, about wanting to maximize the performance of our vehicles and minimize the cost. And so fuel economy is important. And when we look at fuel economy, the most important thing is to think about engine oil today. And as Blake, you mentioned, you have the Restore and Protect video up there. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty amazing. And I think you should watch that. But today I wanted to talk about one engineer's truck. And of course, I am the engineer. That's a 2013 GMC that I bought. And, to me, it was like, oh my gosh, I finally have this amazing truck. And I really have enjoyed owning it. And I've taken a picture or two of it. And I bought it to tow RVs as I was thinking about retirement occasionally. It has a 6-liter engine. So being a 3/4 ton, it has a 6-liter, does not have active fuel management or displacement on demand or those kind of things.
Okay.
3 previous owners, so I got a good deal. Had a gooseneck trailer hitch in the bed, so that's a red flag, and it says it can actually do stuff. So I felt like, okay, fine. Had the big 410-to-1 rear axle, could tow 14,000 pounds. I finally got the right truck, and I thought, I'll just keep some fuel and maintenance records, and I'll start doing that in an Excel spreadsheet. Believe it or not, my dad did that, and my wife's dad did that. And so we've just been kind of doing maintenance records and spreadsheets for a long, long time as we do vehicles. You see an RV, it's not too heavy, maybe 7,000, 8,000 pounds. I rented that, and my BMW K1600 GT motorcycle on a trip to the mountains. So it towed a little bit, but not a whole lot, as I haven't yet got into those RVs. But when you buy an old truck, oh my gosh, there are things you really need to do. And one of them was
like buying an old house.
It is. It's kind of like, my gosh. So on the left, you'll see the brake rotors I had to put on. Well, the calipers were stuck and the brake rotors were trash. And, that was a big issue. Tires, oh my gosh, they're expensive, light truck tires. The shocks were gone, so I put some new shocks on. Even the coil wires were gone. And so I put some Axle Racing coil, engineers, we're different. We put the crazy stuff on there. But a lot of maintenance and upgrades. I always try to use great filters and great motor oil. And of course, over time, things just break, like the radiator end tank. And I was, with my background here at Afton Chemical, I was able to look at some real technician level tools and monitor all the attributes. So I had some good fun with that, making sure that the vehicle was up and running well. And of course, I was glad it was a flex fuel engine, because that saved me some bucks. Those of you who don't know what flex fuel is, of course, it's a majority alcohol fuel, and it's not available everywhere. And the octane is super high at 94. And so it cheapens the overall expense when you fill up the big tank on a heavy duty truck. But it does reduce your fuel economy, as you can see, because believe it or not, it's about 25% less heat content per gallon than traditional gasoline. And
Yep.
So you do get a loss of fuel economy, gain in apparent power, great cleaning with the ethanol present. So I was thinking about, all these things as I enjoyed driving the truck. And of course, being an engineer, I admit I'm an engineer, started keeping track of everything. So you'll see my fuel economy here on the left and keeping track of it and where it was and, what octane and how much did it cost and all that detail. And then the maintenance as well with odometers and dates. And I got to thinking, wow, I've got this great truck, but over time, the fuel economy was not very, very exciting. Well, that, and it's not going to be great. But I kept experimenting a little and thinking through stuff. And a fellow at work said, you ought to try Valvoline Restore and Protect. I went, what's that? And he said, well, it's this, new formulation that we have, and it should help your old truck. And I thought, okay, well, why not try it? Well, what I had been using was Mobil 1. Fabulous motor oil, formulated with great performance, great base stocks, etc. And
just let me interrupt just for a second,
sure.
Just so people, because not everybody may be familiar with where you worked.
No, sure.
So Chip worked at Afton Chemical. For people that watch the channel regularly, you should know there's only 4 companies that make the additive packages. The Betty Crocker cake mix, if you will, that's used to make motor oils and fuels. So Afton is one of those 4 companies that makes the additive packages that go into literally every brand of oil and every brand of fuel on the planet. So he had a little bit of, we'll call it inside information there, possibly.
I did.
Okay.
Just a little. And my friend who helped formulate the product suggested that because he knew my quest for keeping that old truck running. Right. When you think about your vehicles, everybody's got an old something. I mean, you buy it new or you buy it sort of new, but pretty soon it gets old and you begin to wonder. For those of you looking at the graph back on the far left, that's about 152,000 miles old. So this is not a new vehicle when I bought it. And I did that because I didn't want to invest a lot of money in a towing vehicle, occasional use. And so, at 12 and a half, whatever miles per gallon, I was like, okay. And I kept tracking it and tracking it and tracking it. And Mobil 1 just thought, this is a good product, so why not use it? I've used it for years. And after my friend said, why don't you try it? I've been complaining. Noise upon startup, tap it noise, clutter, clanking a little bit that would magically go away after about 30 seconds. And the fuel dilution was also something I noted because I was able to look at the actual alcohol content in the fuel, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, why is there so much? So I was worried. And so when he said, try the Valvoline Restore and Protect, I thought, why not? It's readily available. And so you see there about, the end of May of 24, I started using it. And to, I think, anybody's eyes, when you look at the graph of fuel economy, the blue line over time, you see an immediate change. And my eyes kind of bugged out. I'm like, there's just no way. There's no way that this is actually changing my fuel economy. And I kept using it. And I was like, there's something going on here. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but something's going on here. So being kind of an experimenter and, a technical guy, I was like, I think I'll just go back to the other oil and see what happens and go back to the Restore and Protect. And so a few more oil changes than the typical owner over the life of the vehicle. I've typically changed a little sooner. And you're looking at an average of 3,600 miles oil drain interval with this data across all these tanks of fuel. And I kept seeing this Valvoline Restore and Protect fuel economy high. The grand average is the line in the middle, the long-term average you see. So that's a number that really tells a story because there's so much variation in fuel economy data. Okay, everybody raise their hands who's ever, checked their fuel economy. We've all done it, right? And sometimes it's high and sometimes it's low, and you think, but wait, it was this just the other day, and wait, now it's low, and is there something wrong? Well, this is really what we're dealing with when we run tests, because in the real world, there's a lot of variability. that variability can be caused by who knows what. And so,
temperature outside,
yeah,
how you drive, your driving cycle, all those things factor in.
And you see the dip there close to 7.5 miles per gallon. Guess what? That's your towing. And so you recognize, my goodness gracious, how do I make sense out of all this? And so that's part of our story today is unveiling how you deal with variability when you're dealing with questions about the products that you use. It's a fun process for engineers. So did it actually help? I thought I'd take the data and run it through.
There we go.
Wow. So I use a software that is known as JMP, J-M-P. It's a statistical analysis tool, and it's very, very, very powerful. And so one of the things that we do when we look at what could it be is a tool called predictor screening. So the way we put the data in, we entitle each column. So there's miles per day, there's fuel source, there's fuel octane, ethanol content, which engine oil, tires, transmission, and shocks. I forgot to mention I had to spend $4,000 on a transmission. Oh my. thinking I was getting a heavy duty truck. Apparently the previous owners did use it for heavy duty towing. So I thought, well, in the data, I know I changed transmissions. That could have affected fuel economy. Tires, they were big, clunky off-road tires. I went to the Michelin light truck tires. That can affect fuel economy. The amount of ethanol, I experimented with ethanol-free, E85, E10, and then of course premium versus regular. Different brands of fuel, so different additive packages in the fuel, and of course miles per day. That's a really interesting factor. And miles per day, of course, goes up when you take a trip and goes down when you just commute to work. So the predictor screening allows us to look and say, well, what really drives fuel economy? What are the possible predictor factors that, and you see about 43% of fuel economy is related to miles per day. No surprise, but that's important. And so when you're thinking about your truck, your car, your RV, just remember miles per day is an important factor. The fuel mattered, the octane certainly mattered, the ethanol content, and you get the idea that factors do have predictive ability, and we can look at those factors in our analysis. So this is a graph of miles per day, and I wanted to also point out to everybody on the channel, we have to all understand it's not always linear, and this is an example that shows that it's not always a linear response. And so sometimes you have a threshold, and sometimes you have kind of just a natural logarithm or exponent. Here you kind of see over 50 miles per day, and suddenly you get a lot better fuel economy, but not absolute. So when you do analysis, it's important to kind of recognize if this is an important factor, I need to put it into what we call a model. And then put it into a model, now we can account for these things which are independent of any other part of the experiment, in this case, engine oil.
This is so cool. I mean, that's the thing, is that when you have the correct background to be able to collect all the data and then organize that data and put it in the kind of the correct buckets, and then you've got the right software, we can go in there and then you can really begin to kind of see what does that data tell you, right? Because that's the thing, I think that's the reason why this channel exists, right? Is because for years, well, let's call it decades, right? Everyone that's a car guy and gal that cares about their vehicles, we've all had to operate from speculation and from third-party hearsay. I mean, that's all we had, right? And I know that way I say that makes it sound like that's all bad. It's just not very reliable, right? And you tried to find the most reliable sources you could and lean on that, because we'll call it real data like this was not accessible to the public.
Right.
And what it's really cool, even though this is just your experience, but at least we're able to take your experience, and it's not just, well, Chip says it worked pretty good. It's like, nope, Chip's going to show you Chip's data. Then you can decide what you want to from Chip's data. But at least Chip has real data organized and done
Right.
professionally so that you can interpret it and make sense from of yourself.
Yes, and I recognize not everybody has jump and not everybody has the background I have. And so my intent is to only share that it's possible to think through this, but it takes a little bit of work. And sometimes joining a community like this helps you make those better decisions, because we can teach and help you understand things.
And that's what's really cool, right? Is that we do have this giant community, right? There's literally 663 people watching right now, right? And because we have this big community and people are sending in their samples to Speed Diagnostics, thank you for doing that, by the way. What we're able to do is then take all that data, process it using your experience, using JMP, and later today during this live stream, we're going to show you what we've learned from that, right? Because we're all doing this together. And so this is like really crowd-funded data analysis. So everyone watching, realize that you're contributing to this, right? When you're using Speed Diagnostics, when you're watching these videos, you're doing all this stuff, we're making this possible where we can do this independent. And it's just changing or breaking the way things have worked for decades. And this is freaking cool. All right, I'm gonna shut up. Let you keep on talking.
Well, I appreciate everything you've said, Lake, and I know your passion, and I share in that passion. It's my hope is that I help you. My hope is that we can somehow help you succeed in making good decisions. And that really, my background through all the years of engineering was, how can I help? How can I help you make a good decision? And how can we do that? So this is how sometimes we have to look at data, and it's absolutely unbelievable how computers can help. This is a tool called neural modeling. We're talking about using the computer as if it's a brain. That's why it's called neural modeling. You know, sometimes you just know something's right, and sometimes your wife says, no, I'm right. Well, that brain power, that sense of, I got it, I've sensed it, I felt it, I understand it, actually is now part of some modeling efforts. And so with neural modeling, we're able to find the signal from the noise. If you think back to this right here, how in the world can you make sense out of all that variability? And when you think back to here, you look at all that maintenance and all the changes. How do we deal with that? Well, we're going to use neural modeling. So what neural modeling does is basically you take some of the data, not all of it, some of the data, and you say, how can I explain what I've observed? And so you look at predicted fuel economy in a model and actual fuel economy. So for those, I don't know if you can see that, predicted is across the bottom and actual up and down. So when you think about the data, if you model it well, you will see what you see here. In the actual by predicted plot, and that nice diagonal line, I don't know if I'm on camera with it, there it goes.
Yep.
That actually allows you to go, wow, that model said something. That model makes sense, because the predicted versus the actual actually make a line with a little variability on either side. And the part that the computer does so well is it randomly selects 2/3 of the data in this case and builds a model. And then it says, I'm not sure that model's right. I'm going to test it. And it takes the 1/3 of the data that it hasn't even looked at, and it throws it into the model and says, you know what? They agree. I got a good model. And so that's what neural modeling does. Any modeling, basically, but neural modeling in particular. And you see on the left panel, the factors. I get on camera. Anyway, you see what I'm getting at. The miles per day, the fuel source, the octane, the ethanol, the tires, the transmission, all of that's in the model. And so now when we look at the model, we actually say, now I can help remove that variability and make sense out of the change in engine oils. And so that's what we did. Oh my gosh. Predicted fuel economy, basically the model. And then you see the Valvoline Restore and Protect, the Mobile One, the majority of the time, and some a diesel oil Rotella T, and Mobil 1 European. And so these dots are the individual tanks that you see, and this line is the average. And so you can see the majority of the data, Mobil 1 does kind of center around the average. And these, this looks a little different. More of them down here. And then you see the Valvoline Restore and Protect, and you see a lot more of them up here.
Right.
And you begin to go, I think we're onto something. We're onto something. And what you have to recognize in here, and I hope all of you watching can kind of wrap your heads around this, because we're including miles per day, we're including tires, we're including any maintenance issues, we're including all those factors in making this predicted fuel economy value. And so we're actually more able to see the truth by including those factors in the model. And I hope that makes sense, Lake. Does that make sense in your?
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. It just, those clusters just show you exactly what you're seeing, you know. It's like, yeah, you modeled it all out. It lets you kind of sort out those variables, and then you can look at them clearly as to what they really are.
Exactly, because our mission, of course, in analyzing data is to present the truth and try to make good decisions based on the truth. So that inherent variability is just, again, part of the model. But then a simpler way perhaps to look at it is to look at the actual averages of each engine oil here, Valvoline, Mobil 1, Rotella, and the European 5W40, and then to look at the placement relative to just everyday variability. So what's in here is just everyday variability as best we can detect. Average about 12.8. And then those points that are outside the everyday variability, that means we've made a difference. Those that are inside the variability, you can't say that this one's any different than that one. So it's hopefully a pretty simple graphical representation. For whatever reason, the 40 weight didn't do as well. And we can look at viscosity as perhaps one of the reasons for that. So this is called analysis of means. But the point of showing it to you today is to say, you can believe that this lies outside of normal everyday variability. And therefore, you can say there's something going on here. And that's pretty cool.
See, this is the key thing, right? Is that having data is fantastic, right? But then that next level is understanding what data is significant and what data isn't. But there's just noise, right? Like, okay, this number's higher than that number. Well, that means it's a difference. Well, maybe not always, right? That could be noise. So if you can separate out what is actual signal, this is something you need to pay attention to, versus what's noise, ignore it. That's really, really important.
It is, and that's the quest we all have. And I know as we all think about what car to buy or what tires to buy or what shock absorbers to buy, we really want to make a difference. And so this technique and this modeling allows us to say with some certainty, this oil happens to be in our data set here, Valvoline, Restore and Protect, differs from Mobil 1 high mileage 5W30. And the reasons are we think understandable. Looking at it as a business graph, you can see quite a change. 10.5 here is the leftmost, and 11.5 all the way out to 13 and change out here for the modeled fuel economy. So, you know, this is somewhat confusing, and a lot of people have never seen this before. I get it. I understand. This is how it looks just as a typical graphic, but we do know this actually differs from this, and that's very useful information. So takeaways in the story of Chip's truck, it takes some doing to analyze the data. We have to recognize that we're making irreversible changes. You can make both bad and good ones. Changing an engine oil, in this case, did some good. But going back and forth, you know, sometimes it's irreversible. And of course, maintenance and things that you do to your vehicle can change your fuel economy, and you may not be able to sift that out. But what it did for my truck, which is the 152,000 mile, now to 195,000 mile, ring seating and freedom to seal is critical. And keeping
Absolutely.
deposits away is very, very important. And low sliding friction is a great benefit. And Lake, I don't know if you can speak to that with your recent visit to Valvoline.
Well, the biggest thing is the rings, right? I mean, I think that's where you're going to see is obviously there's a friction modifier package in there, and every
Right.
API, SP, now the SQ rated motor oil has to meet at least if it's got the starburst on it, it means it meets the, we'll call it fuel economy contribution that the engine oil is required to give above a reference point that they have, right, for that. So, but really, when you're talking about these modern engines with lower tension piston rings, having the ability for that ring to rotate, like you said, and move properly is going to allow the ring to seal properly. When your ring seals properly, you're going to get more working because now you have less blow by. So now that combustion pressure actually moves the piston versus blowing by the piston. That's huge. And there's a kind of double whammy there too, because when you have higher blow by, you're going to have higher oil temperature, higher contamination level of the oil. And those are the things that degrade the oil and hurt the performance of the oil. And of course, in any engine now, they're all hydraulically controlled with lifters and other things. So when you can keep all those surfaces clean, they're going to function better. So it's just the whole thing comes all around. It's really cool, right? It's just, I think this is a really neat singular example that kind of bookends well what we saw from the 500,000 mile engines that Valvoline's test that they did, which we were fortunate enough to be able to kind of get our hands in on a little bit because those guys at Valvoline are buddies, and they said, "Hey, here, why don't you come on, Hank, play out with us?" So that was great. But then you've got your experience that bookends that. Then I can also say too, right? I don't know, 1,000+ samples that have been sent in from viewers and customers for Speed Diagnostics, when we get to see the same thing, right? Where I can see the fuel dilution drop over time. I can see in their comments and their notes to me what's happening, right? That, hey, the engine's running better. It stopped making noise and fuel economy is going up. All these things that are happening that you saw, that Valvoline saw, we also see there. So to me, it's a very nice validation that each of these things is just one test or one data point, if you will. But when you take all of them together, you get a big picture that says the cleaning ability of an oil like this is positively affecting the performance of the engine. And that's what's really cool, right? Is
indeed.
And now here, so because some people are going to be like, "Man, you're being such a fanboy about all this," right? Exactly. And put all the disclaimers up, right? Everybody pay attention, right? One of the reasons why I'm such an advocate of Restore and Protect is because I hate motor oil additives. I hate when people start putting crap in their oil that doesn't need to be in there. And I get it, right? If you're a guy with an Audi engine that's an Alusil engine and you've got those crappy 2-piece oil rings and it's full of carbon, before Restore and Protect, you didn't have any other option other than put Seafoam or BG, or you had to do some kind of mechanic in a can to try to fix this thing. Or the Berryman's, I think, has been the most successful, right? So people were doing all these things to try to make things better, right? And none of those are really good options, right? And one of the things that you kind of put out there, or maybe I saw it in the comments, I forget, but here's the point, right? When you put an additive into your oil, especially a solvent, where you're trying to clean things up, right? Because that's when you're trying to clean something, you're going to put in something that is a solvent. Well, as we mentioned in the Restore and Protect video about wet belts, the motor oil itself, any API, SP, SQ rated motor, especially SQ, right? Because SQ has a broader set of elastomers and materials, non-metallics that are being tested, for hardness and for durability and swell, so that to make sure that the oil chemistry itself is not damaging the elastomers used in the engine, seals, belts, those other plastic parts that are in the engine. They're making sure of that. When you put a solvent in your oil, it's like throwing a chemical grenade in there. You just don't know if you pulled the pin or not.
Yeah, don't pull the pin.
Right. And that's the issue that I have, right? And so people can call me fanboy all you want to. I don't care. What I'm trying to tell you is I'm trying to keep you from making a mistake, because sometimes people put stuff in their oil and it works out for them. Sometimes people put stuff in their oil and it works really bad for them. This is a common refrain, right? So what's really cool is, everybody, because now I'm venting. I'll get the thing down a little bit. Play Russian roulette, right? It's chemical Russian roulette with your engine when you put additives in your oil. Okay, so fortunately, so I get passionate about this. Chip has been doing a deep dive for a couple of months now with the Speed Diagnostics database, because one of the questions we ask is, did you use an additive in your oil, right? So Chip has done the data analysis to tell us, okay, what happens when you put additives in your oil? One thing that I've seen over here, and I said I wasn't going to answer all the comments, but I'm just going to try to help some people out, because when it about oil filters. Okay, so we are going to back to Donaldson, and we're going to do some filter media testing and all this kind of stuff. Well, I will say this is just a quick thing, right? The best thing you can do on filters, oil filters, is you want to use the highest efficiency at the lowest micron rating you can for your vehicle, and then change that filter at the time that's specified by the filter manufacturer. If they say it's a 10,000 mile filter, run it to 10,000 miles. And if you're a 5,000 mile oil change person, then change your oil at 5,000 miles. Don't change the filter the first time, and then go another 5,000 miles, and then change your filter at that 10,000 miles on the filter. Because if it's rated for that, it can do that. And it will actually continue to get better over that full 10,000 miles. And the reason for that, and I know I'm going to get hate mail on this, but it's okay, is that as those particles get caught in there, there's essentially a dust cake that forms down in the media. Now, on the air filter video we did, when we talked about this, it's really easy to see that dust cake because it forms on the top layer, and it makes the air cleaner more efficient over time. Now, that increases restriction, but on an oil filter, it does it down inside, right? So the pores now become slightly smaller. It's not as we'll call it the change in efficiency with that dust cake in the oil filter is not as great a change as what happens with an air filter. Air filters are way more responsive early on to that dust cake formation. Oil filters, it still happens, just not as dramatic, right? But it's still there. And the reality is, if you can improve your filtration slightly, and you don't have to risk any contaminant introduction or spend any money, why would you? There's no benefit to changing your filter early. If it just makes you feel better, then go right ahead, right? But, and I think this is the perfect segue, Chip, into this next piece. And do you want to use data, or you want to act on emotion, right? Because there's a whole lot of emotion involved when it comes to people, I'm going to say it, augmenting their oil, right? They feel like they've got to do something to their oil because the oil on the shelf obviously couldn't possibly be good enough that I need to do something different, right, Chip?
Well, yeah, we'll talk about what your passions are generated from. I mean, you care a lot about that vehicle, that Toyota that you drive around all the time down where you are. Yeah, so
Yeah. All right.
we're going to talk about what might be best for our vehicles. And again, thanks to Lake and the hard work. I don't know if you can tell, but I love looking at data and helping people with understanding that data. And to look at the amount of data that we have, it's really, really helpful. And so today, what we hope to be able to answer is augmenting your engine oil necessary? We use the word augmenting because additives are in engine oil, and are we adding additives
Right.
to additives, et cetera. So anyway, augmenting to us is just that sense of we're doing more with that engine oil. We're going to talk a little bit about how engine oils are developed. There's a lot in our community, a lot of internet forums, a lot of people who say they're all the same, or they're all, just kind of crazy, just oil and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And, it's just simple. And you can go to a certain store and buy one cheaper than this other store. So use the cheap oil. Right? No, we should use the more expensive oil. Engine oil development, I wanted you all to understand more about the licensing practices, the testing, the cost, and the timeline. And Lake's got a lot of experience in this. So Lake's going to share from his experiences, and we'll be sharing kind of an overview with some slides to help you come to some understanding of just how engine oils are developed. Then we'll have used oil analysis for gasoline, used oil analysis for diesel, and then offer some final thoughts. So when you look at engine oil development, you've been through it, Lake, all those SPs, SQs, walk us through kind of that sense of how long it takes.
Well, it takes a long time, especially if you look at, say, from SN to SP, because that really was a watershed moment, right? That was like 7 years to do that. And the reason for that is we changed all the engines.
That's right.
They basically retired every old engine because many of the engines had been, out of production or out of, regular use in production for decades at that point. So the idea was we needed a fleet of test engines that actually representative of what modern engines are, what the car park today looks like. And that was the big change. And of course, that also came around the same time as the introduction of turbocharged direct injection, LSPI problem. So it was a huge lift to do that. So it took, many, many years, tons and tons of testing to use, reference oils and really, great analytical techniques to come up with engine tests that actually mimic the real world. And, I've said this before in a previous video, so I'm just going to say it right now. API SL way back in 2001 to SM to SN. If you're a high performance person, oils got worse. That's why zinc became a buzzword. That's why ZVP additives and all these high performance oils and things like that came into market, right? Because I was one of those guys out there flying the flag saying, hey, oil's changed and it's not for the better. That statement stopped being true at API SP because of the change due to LSPI. The balance of things changed, and because we had tests now that were actually more representative to the real engines that were happening. All these things came together and really made a difference, right? So the thing is, as you go to SQ and what comes next, there are years of testing going on. Right now, what's the next slide? I think it shows some information about the actual test process. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
right.
I wanted to show you on the left, you'll see the phases and then a generic schedule up to 100% of the time. So think back to the 7 years to do this. Part of it is what Lake's talking about is engine sequence testing, which is phase 6. There were no engines. And so that added a lot of time, but all of this has to be done. And it's
Right.
so very challenging.
And that needs a segment. Phase one is, the OEMs have a seat at the table,
Indeed.
at ILSAC, at API. And so what they're doing is they're saying, hey, here's what we're seeing in the field. We need to address these issues that are occurring with this next round of test, this next specification. How do we do it? And sometimes it's just a change of the passing limit on an existing test. Sometimes it's creating a new test like sequence 9, sequence 10. These are brand new tests relatively that were designed to address issues. Timing chain wear, low speed pre-ignition, right? I said, we mentioned SQ is going to have these different elastomers where there's more, plastic, rubber type components that are now being tested for compatibility with the oil to make sure that we have durability. I guess the point that we're trying to make is that when you formulate an engine oil, there's a lot of work that goes into it, takes a lot of time. And the next slide, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It is not cheap to go through all of these steps.
Absolutely.
Right?
And just to tag on to what Lake said about the tasks here, additive component screening, these are the actual nuts and bolts of making new chemistry, which is, again, so much time. And my colleagues at Afton Chemical actually can bolt together components. And those components are singular function. They are a dispersant, a detergent, a friction modifier, etc. And when you do that, this is sometimes years of background component development that you could say comes off the screen and comes in here to finally get into these tests. And then you actually have to mix them together in the prototype formulation.
Well, and let's just talk about that for a second, because this is one thing, again, kind of jumping ahead slightly, but when you're going through that additive component selection, the best analogy I can give anybody is this is like blood pressure medicine and other stuff going on, right? That sometimes you can take one medicine to address one issue, but then that one medicine has other side effects that none of these additives operate independently. They all cross-link, and sometimes this additive plus that additive actually create a third chemical. Sometimes that third chemical isn't created until the engine oil gets hot.
Most of the pain in formulating that I did was that exact reaction. Like, where did that come from?
Right.
Heat, pressure, stirring. Turns out that engines, axles, transmissions are all kind of like your kitchen. And you put these things together and stir them around and put them in the oven and stuff changes. I mean, everybody's made a cake. That's kind of what happens.
Oh, yeah. I mean, literally, engines are chemical reactors. Every combustion cycle is a chemical reaction. And there are byproducts from chemical reactions going into your motor oil. And then, by the way, your motor oil is also having chemical reactions every single second, depositing additives, because the oil is basically an additive carrier. And it's depositing the additives onto the surfaces of the engine. And those additives are interacting at a molecular level, actually at atomic level, with that and creating films to protect your engine. There's a really cool video that Lubrizol made years ago called The Atomic Knife, right? If you guys want to nerd out for a second, just go look up that later. The Atomic Knife, if you like this stuff, but you're here hanging out on a Saturday morning, 776 of you should go check that out later because you won't be disappointed, right? So anyway, the point being, developing engine oils is very complex. It takes a ton of time and it costs a ton of money. This is not cheap, to do this. So by the time you have that engine oil, even a no-name brand engine oil, right? Because let's just go ahead and, we made a video about this before, but it's probably worth saying. When you go to Walmart and there's SuperTech motor oil on there, we all know that Walmart didn't make that. And there's some private label blender somewhere in the middle of the country that's packaging that for them. Well, they're not doing any kind of development. But you know who is? Where Chip used to work. those guys at Afton in Richmond, Virginia, they have all the test cells that do the engine testing, that do the transmission and the gear testing, that for the API certifications. They've done all of that work. And basically what that private label blender is doing is they're going to Afton Chemical and they're buying the recipe essentially. They're going to buy the additive package from Afton and they're going to follow the formulary of use this base oil at these treat rates and this process, and then you can make that oil, and then that oil is going to pass all of the tests. They don't have to know anything other than follow the instructions and pay the licensing fee, and you've got good oil. And we've shown that in the previous video. Right. That the brand doesn't matter. That exactly. it can do it. It's the API chemistry.
Licensing matters.
Right, absolutely. Because when you don't have the API license, it means it may not have passed all those tests. What did they do to the oil so that now that it can't be licensed? That may not be a good thing, right? And so, I mentioned this in the chat earlier, but I'm going to say it out loud just for everybody so they can understand it. So, right, Restore and Protect, Pennzoil Ultra Platinum. It does not have the Dexos license. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is GM with Dexos, they actually require full formulation, component by component disclosure.
Right.
You just can't say, hey, I'm using Afton High-Tech 11183 and call it good, right? They're going to want to know from Afton what every single component in High-Tech 11183 is, because they want to know. Well, if you have proprietary chemistry, you're not just going to go give them that. Oh, and by the way, they want $1 a gallon royalty on every gallon you sell globally. Yeah. By the way, so here, give me a whole lot more money, like 15 cents versus $1, and tell me what you got.
Yeah.
No, I'm not working that hard to learn all this stuff just to give you extra money and my stuff. So forget about it.
Well,
I'm gonna shut up now.
Dexos is a great credential to have, and it's worth it to be in that GM factory fill and service fill. But it does take a lot of money and it does take a lot of time. And the point of showing this to you today is to bring to mind when you're at the store, if you're at Walmart and you're buying whatever brand of oil you like to use. Now you can say, my goodness, I'm buying a quart of motor oil that might have cost millions of dollars upfront money to put it in my car. Millions.
Millions, yeah. As millions have gone into this to make that one bottle of oil.
And you look at Lake and I on camera, and we're smiling, and we're just smiling because we've lived this and we understand the incredible journey that each and every formulator in the industry has. Whichever company, Afton or Lubrizol or Infinium or Ornite, it is so fun to formulate, and it's so hard. Because when you say, why does it cost this much? The answer is because there's so many failures.
Right.
And that is hard when you come in, you think, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to put in more phosphorus to get more wear protection. And you try it and you fail. And your head just goes, what? Because what you don't understand is what you don't understand. And so you learn over time. There's so many failed tests in all of this. And so you finally get it to where it passes all those tests, that big list of tests. Wow. And so it's really hard. And so engine oil is so much fun to formulate, and you feel such a sense of accomplishment at the end of all this. So now
we showed that before, right? In the previous live stream when we did the data deep dive from the 8 oil test, it was really obvious that the oils that had, say, a ton of moly in them, guess what? They didn't do very well in the TIOS test, right? For the turbo oxidation stability, right?
That's right.
Higher level of moly, more deposits. So it's always this balancing act. It's tough, which is why I don't want you to put stuff in your oil because you're going to throw the balance off. But I'm going to shut up and let Chip talk.
So let's talk about, now that we know engine oils are really, really hard to formulate and cost a lot and take a lot of time, I just wanted to touch on a couple of reasons we might augment engine oils. Because I think we all recognize decisions are not made based on data. Decisions are actually made for more, shall we say, psychology reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all can say, yep, I would like to influence the outcome of my car's performance. I want to try to control that. I did it. You saw the data from our first presentation where I tried to do everything I could. What kind of shocks, what kind of tires, et cetera. Exerting control, making sure we influence the outcome by choosing what we're doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that's the reason that some people choose to augment engine oils. Another possible reason is at times we go, if I don't do anything, that might not work. I better do something. Inaction being worse than action. It might be how we actually approach decision making. And of course, more is better. I don't know if you've been to North Carolina where Lake is, but when you get iced tea and you say, I'd like some sweet tea, oh my gosh, more is better because that sweet tea is so sweet. I'll never forget the first cup of or a glass of iced tea I got in Shelby, North Carolina many years ago. I almost spit it out at my job interview, and that wouldn't have been good. But sometimes we think more is better. Maybe not. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to tell your spouse, I've got this, it's all figured out. How does the spouse feel? Well, we're like that when someone says, hey, it's already optimized. Sometimes that doesn't feel so good because, I'm not so sure. And so part of our presentation in the previous slides was to help you understand it's already optimized and wow, it really is already optimized. It's still sometimes hard to accept that. Of course, sometimes we think adding good to good must be really good. And so that's probably a lot of these engine oil augmented products that, this is good and this is good. So together they must be really good. And we often find our way through the life. We make a decision, and when nothing happens, we think that decision must be good. Not always. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so that's part of our data deep dive today, is to recognize that decisions we make that result in no harm may actually not really be good decisions. Right. And of course, the big one, sometimes we fear losing something valuable. My ancient 3/4 ton pickup truck, to me at the time, was the most incredible truck in the world. I didn't want to, ruin that and make it. So I tried to take care of it. So that's another thought process for your consideration, why we do that. So we're going to look at used oil data, and it's from the speed diagnostic data set. And we're going to show used oil analysis results. This is the only intent we have.
Right.
Additive and engine oil manufacturers, by additive, I mean people that make engine oil and people that make the separate additives that you buy, have access to tests and test methods from which claims are made in good faith and in all truthfulness. They are doing everything they can to give you the truth as best they know the truth and based on tests that they're choosing to make those decisions. All we're doing today is sharing the real world used oil analysis data, and we're basing that on the customer reported usage, statements made by each customer. Did they augment the engine oil? Did they augment their fuel, or both? And so we're not talking about anything other than used oil analysis results. And we don't, as our companies, have access to any test data or test methods or claims. So again, this is data that Speed Diagnostics has. We're presenting through the Motor Oil Geek channel, and we're not doing anything but that. Looking at gasoline fueled vehicles, the data, just to give you a sense of where we are, we're at over 8,000 rows of used oil analysis data. That's a good amount of data. Is unleaded, daily driver, no unusual vehicles, just typical everyday use. We process the data to create both key metrics, and we group factors into what we call buckets. And so those buckets allow us to analyze things a little bit easier. Then for this analysis, we looked at customer comments. So out of those 8,000 rows of data, we looked for keywords using software to determine if the owner actually augmented the engine oil and or the fuel. And so we have 4 categories: engine oil only, fuel only, both, and neither. And so that augmentation is, again, based on customer comments, keywords, things that you recognize in the comments, and then looking through all the data, looking at the keywords, looking again to make sure we had the most accurate data for you all that we could give. So out of those 8,000, wow, look at that. 94% did neither, but
yeah,
there's about 6% that augmented stuff. And so 6% of our community chooses to augment engine oil or fuel or both. And I think that's going to be likely higher than the typical population. I think everybody sees that because we're those guys and girls that really want to make sure we do the right thing. And so for your review today, we just want to kind of frame it for you that about 6% of the 8,000 rows actually tried to improve their engine oil or fuel or both.
Wait, one thing interesting to think about this is that obviously when you go to the parts store, there's going to be that one shelf or so that's going to have all the different, oil and fuel additives on there. And if you think about that data, it's okay, out of the, I forget how many hundreds of millions of gallons of oil that get sold in the US every year, if you had 6% of that was being sold as an additive, it's a pretty daggone good business. That's why those guys that sponsor race cars, right? Andy Granatelli and the guys at STP back in the day, sponsored Parnelli, and they sponsored the Unsers, and they sponsored Richard Petty and everything, right? So yeah, the additive business is a pretty good one to have.
Yeah, and so when we look at the 6%, I wanted to bring to your all's attention who are and what are those choices. So here
this one's incredible. This one's incredible, right? If everybody watching, pay attention to this chart right here, because this is the one that broke my brain. I'm like, dang.
Yeah. So 2.4% of the people who only augment their engine oil. So that's the average. And so when you look at the average brand proportion of those who augment engine oil, 2.4%. So the average of all oil brand names is that. So when you look at the engine oils down, I'll get my mouse going here. From here to here is more and more choices to augment the engine oil. So you see here, Quaker State, Honda, Toyota, Motorcraft, Driven, other, some of the people didn't tell us, factory filled, etc. All these brands of engine oil, of those that said, I add something to the engine oil, the number of people who added something to the engine oil divided by that number is this percentage. So you see here, 50 out of 488 augment the engine oil of liquid moly owners. So that's about 12%. So,
over 10%. That's nuts.
Right. So
it's a high-priced oil.
The average. Right. And so you look at these brands and you think, well, where's my brand? And you think, well, Pennzoil, that's a popular one. Valvoline, we've been talking about Valvoline, Amsoil, all these brands, even all the brands that it appears that people are choosing good brands and they're choosing to augment them. And so that's, to me, it's interesting. Porsche owners using Porsche oil, 58 out of the 1,507 owners augment the engine oil. So there's both, let me back up. This is the OEM chart. Let's frame it up.
Yeah.
Nissan all the way to Land Rover along this here. And then the number or proportion of those that augment the engine oil. In our data, very few of any of these guys. And then as you move down this, you see, my goodness, wait, I drive a Porsche. Oh my gosh, 58 out of roughly 1,600 choose to augment the engine oil, about 3.7%. And if you scan between the average here, the dotted line, and you think about, well, who's above average? Porsche, Audi, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, Volvo, and Land Rover. All of these are European OEMs. And so people in our community that own the European OEMs seem to augment their engine oil far more than average. And so if you look at that kind of just as a simple way, you can think of increasing vehicle cost, increasing engine oil cost, you can think higher proportion of engine oil augmentation. Pardon the silly graphics, but that's kind of interesting when you think about it. The more it costs, the better or higher cost of engine oil, I won't say better, that you also find a lot of people that are sending oil into speed diagnostics are augmenting their oil.
It's a very interesting psychological analysis there, actually, because this is 100%. Someone said it's not augmented, it's grease. No, these are people who are telling us they augmented the oil, right?
Right.
This isn't based on what we see in the analysis. This is what people are telling us they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. That what you see is the people that are spending more on their vehicle are operating from that perspective. They're going to buy the higher end oil. Yes. And then they're going that step further, and then they're putting more additives in the high end oil. Like they're just tripling down. Like I bought the expensive car, now I'm going to buy the most expensive oil, and then I'm going to go buy the most expensive additives to put on top of it, thinking that that is going to help them, but they're going to get better results by doing so.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the psychology of these decisions, which is why we spent a few minutes talking about that we do want to try to control the outcome, and we do want to minimize loss. So let's look at, now that we know who's doing it and what brands are doing it, let's look at our models. So for those of you who were with us at our last Data Deep Dive live stream, you may recognize some of these model terms, factors. For those of you who are just joining for the first time, the modeling here allows us to account for factors that differ between each analysis. So all of those 8,000 rows of data, if we just looked at the wear metals, that might not be truthful, because some have very old vehicles, some have brand new vehicles, some might have more or less contamination. And so what we've discovered in analyzing the data is these 5 factors are really, really important. So vehicle odometer, engine oil viscosity, fuel dilution, and 2 kinds of contamination, both internal as well as external. And now for our talk today, we're going to add in owner augmentation. And so by looking at this, what we're trying to do is to give you a sense of recognizing these 5 factors are all important. We're not going to forget about those. We're actually going to use those and understand what happens if we add something to the engine oil, the fuel, both or neither, in view of all of these factors. So I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. We're trying our best to give just the truth. And so we're going to use wear metals per 1,000 miles, and we're speaking of per 1,000 miles of oil drain. So oil drain, if you do it like I did at 3,600 miles, we divide by 3.6. And if you did it at 10,000 miles, you divide by 10. So what that does is it allows the wear metal actually to be normalized to the choice of the owner as far as the oil drain interval. The longer you let the oil drain go, the less wear metals typically are in that sample, and there's a reason for that. And we also do a transformation of the data. I bring this up only to make sure you understand, since wear cannot be less than 0, I wanted to have the best metric for you all, because you cannot have negative wear. And so by taking the log of the data, it actually allows the computer and the modeling to be accurate and meaningful. So odometer buckets, and again, some of you have seen this kind of curve before. This is of this 8,000. So you're looking at odometer buckets between 0 and 5,000, 5 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, etc. And you see the wear metals per 1,000 miles of oil drain interval here. Again, it's a log, but don't worry about that. That's just a scaling. But you see the incredible high wear in the early ages of a vehicle. And we've talked through this, and Lake, you've seen it in all those reports you've written. The younger the vehicle,
every single day, right? Is that you have the highest amount of wear early, and that's why it's so important to do those early oil changes to get all this junk out. And one of the things that we see is when you do those early oil changes, and the faster you remove those contaminants, the sooner it begins to kind of flatline
Right.
and get better, right? You can get down there to that good part. But this is also one thing too that I try to caution people that you go buy a new car and you're all excited and you're going to go do some oil analysis and you're going to find the best oil for your vehicle. You actually have to slow down a little bit, get through the break-in process, let it stabilize before you start changing, because what's going to happen is you're going to fool yourself, right? If you change oil at 3,000 miles and then go to another brand of oil and then change oil again 3,000 miles later, it's going to look better. And you're going to convince yourself that, well, that new oil I used is better, right? Whatever it is, right? I put this additive in, look, it worked better. No, your engine's still breaking in and you're lying to yourself, you know?
Right. And that's the power of big data like we have at Speed Diagnostics. We're able to help you understand this. And again, the data we're showing today, we're actually taking it into account, everything that we're showing you in evaluating the augmenting of engine oil.
Yep.
So, bringing it to operating grade, this is something that we've seen in our data that is the number after the W. So operating grade is here 0W8, 0W12, etc. And you see with gasoline vehicles that nowadays we see a lot more low viscosity engine oils, and earlier technology a lot higher viscosity engine oils. And so we believe that older engines that are higher and higher viscosity required by the OEM have higher levels of engine wear, and basically because they didn't need to have such incredible optimized for low viscosity fuel efficiency and more modern engine controls. All of this process that I'm waving around here, that engineering allowed them to go lower to meet the new fuel economy standards, whereas before the higher grades here, they didn't have to do that. And so surface finishes were rougher, clearances were bigger, et cetera. So we believe this is more a sense of the transition in our industry to more and more engine refinement. Hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think one of the key things we mentioned in a previous video, because obviously there's been, everyone here, we're on YouTube, right? And in the last couple of months, there's been a whole bunch of viral AI generated videos talking about, 0W20 versus 5W30 or 020 versus 1060, all this stuff, right? And what you found in doing a deep dive just like this on the database is that as long as the oil stays in grade, right? Because just so for clarification, so for everybody to understand, so when you're talking about, say, a 5W30 or a 0W30 or even a 10W30 or a straight 30, that oil at 100 degrees Celsius, which is 212 Fahrenheit, will have to be between 9.3 and 12.5 centistokes. That's the actual measured flow rate of the oil. That's called SAE J300 is this chart. It's the standard, and that every oil has to be within that range. So there's different ranges for each viscosity grade. Yes. And what the data analysis showed was that as long as the oil is still in grade, the wear followed that chart exactly. But if the oil was out of grade due to the oil shearing down, the polymer choice was wrong or whatever, and the oil broke down and sheared out of grade, or there was high fuel dilution that pushed it out of grade, that's when we saw the increased wear. And the point I'm trying to make is that 0W20 had just as good a wear as 5W30. There was no statistically significant difference between 0W20 and 5W30 in an engine designed for 0W20 as long as both of them stayed in grade. But if the 0W20 went out of grade, that was the game changer.
Boom, it drops up. It does. So we're taking into account the the actual vehicle operating grade. So again, we're trying to make sure we compare what happens with and without engine oil augmented chemistry, keeping in mind the engine oil operating grade. Fuel dilution, which is a measure of engine condition and sealing and ring quality and ring to cylinder bore and the freedom of the ring to move. Fuel dilution is something that can be affected by the type of fuel injector, whether it's a port or a direct injection engine. And so we divide our measured fuel dilution there across the bottom into these buckets. These are in percent. So greater than 10%, 4 to 10%. Oh my gosh, there's something going on here. And so it's important that we account for that in studying the data. And you can see that there's fuel dilution that does occur. And when it really gets bad, wear just takes off.
Right. And that's something we see, right? As the analyst that's writing the reports, this is 100% what I see. That when it's under 1.5%, it doesn't really matter. When you start to see it get up over 2%, you start to see that impacting wear. When it's over 4%, it's always affecting wear pretty much every single time. And one interesting thing as we come out of the wintertime here, we always see fuel dilution increase in the wintertime, especially with the submission form. We ask what state you're in, right? And the reason for that is pretty easy, right? Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, during the wintertime, it's pretty common that these engines are going to have higher fuel dilution, usually over 2%. But that same customer in the summertime, it'll be 1% or less. That it's that short trip driving, cold weather, that's where you're going to get more fuel dilution build up. So we're going to get the diesel stuff, right? Everybody, we're going to get there, right? Hang on. We're going to pretty much every question in the chat, we are going to answer throughout the course of this, right?
We hope to.
For the most part. I'm trying to pay attention at the same time and talk, but I'm ADD like a squirrel like that. But this is a huge one, right? High fuel dilution is an issue in dirty injectors. It's a big deal, which we talked about before. We're going to do a whole lot more on fuel in the future. But if you can keep those injectors clean and you can limit short trip cold weather driving, you're going to have better results.
And again, we're taking that into account. Now we're going to look at contamination. So sorry for the cryptic PC4 buckets. What in the world is PC4? Well, it's the measurement of particles found in the used engine oil that are 38 microns or larger in size. The filter should filter that out.
Yeah, most engine oil filters should be like 90-something% efficient at around 25 microns. So these things should be being caught.
Exactly. And so these are the buckets. And so this is, particles per milliliter. So this is one of those kind of like how much sugar is in your iced tea. Well, there's not much here. And there's a whole bunch of sugar here. And you sometimes see that in the iced tea when it's floating around at the bottom and you get that teaspoon out and stir it back in there. This is another example of what we call a nonlinear or threshold response. I'll caution you, this means we don't have PC data, and the majority of our data doesn't. So kind of ignore that far right term, but just look at this shape. Boom, it went up and then it leveled across. So we call this a threshold or a nonlinear response. So lower is better. So we want it to be down here. So obviously the less contamination inside the engine, the better. And above about 20 particles per milliliter, suddenly we've got some problems. And you see this big change. And so these are particles that should be filtered. For whatever reason, they're not. And so again, contamination matters and filtration matters. And like you spoke earlier about the need to properly use the engine oil. You want to remind people of that choice, the efficiency versus the capacity?
Oh, yeah. So back to with the oil filter, you want to use the filter that has the highest efficiency at the smallest micron rating. And then, especially for that particle size, right? You want that things that are, if you have a filter, say, for example, that's 99% efficient at 25 micron, that's a better filter than one that's 99% efficient at 45 micron.
Right.
So you want that one. And then you want to run it out as far as the filter manufacturer suggests. Like if they say this is a 15,000 mile filter, run it at 15,000 miles because it's going to do a good job all the way to that point. Usually will actually get better and better and better the closer and closer you get to that. So this is one of the key things. Like you just said, and they were showing, right? The two big factors here that are really causing that threshold type response are contamination, right? I've been doing oil analysis for 20 years, right? That's my day job, is doing used oil analysis. I can tell you, contamination is more critical to your wear results than what brand you're using. I'm going to say it again. Contamination is more critical than the brand choice.
Mm. And we'll talk here about internal contamination, and next we'll talk about external contamination. So silicon, why do we look at silicon in our used oil analysis? Silicon is actually a element that is found to represent dirt.
Yep.
Believe it or not. And so we can look at the dirt in your engine, meaning what's passed into your engine, and look at its effect. Now, there are silicons in engine oils. They're typically in antifoams. But what I wanted to make sure you understood here is we've already looked at odometer in this. And so we're actually looking at silicon levels, including the odometer. And you see now we're kind of doing that fancy statistical ninja stuff where we're actually able to separate the effect of contamination from actually the age of the vehicle. So again, where lower is better. And this is 0 to 4, 4 to 7 ppm, 7 to 13, 13 to 30. And you see like the more contamination external, that's going to harm. And so it speaks to air filters and possibly that sense of where do we drive, that kind of external contamination.
It's huge. This is huge, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure I talk to our customers on a pretty regular basis, and our customers are our viewers. I'm pretty sure that what we've already shown these last few slides should have been like really mind-blowing type moments for everybody, because this is the facts, right? There's all this internet speculation. Everyone's saying this, everyone's saying that. I really want everyone to understand, this is what the data says. I don't care what you've been told before. I don't care what some other YouTuber has said. I don't care what a mechanic has said. This is what the big data analysis says. Contamination, fuel dilution, silicon, dust, junk getting in your engine is the number one thing that's going to cause abnormal wear. It's the most important thing you can do, is to limit contamination.
Agreed. And now let's look at augmentation.
All right. What does adding something to your oil or fuel do?
So when we look at both fuel only, neither, or oil only, so these are the four choices that we all have. We look at wear, with lower being better. This is an average, that little circle, and this is the variability of the data around that choice. So you see that we have very few people that do both. So the variability and the average are much wider here because we're not as sure, because we have very few observations. So we got to be sure that we're saying that somewhere between here and here is all we know about both. Fuel only, neither, and oil only, we have a lot more observations. So we can say with more certainty, the average here, here, and here are the average of wear. And guess what? Does not result in materially lower engine wear. Augmenting any of the engine oils in our data does not. So this number compared to this number are statistically the same. And that's how you look at a chart like that, that these dots and these error bars allow you to go, these are not different. Blake, did you have, thought that they might be different? I mean, I'm just joking with you, but.
No, this is exactly what I thought, right? It's like it doesn't get better. And if anything, the fuel only, what we've seen is when engine has high fuel dilution due to dirty fuel injectors, and a customer uses one bottle of a PEA based additive that can clean the injectors, one bottle, one tank, gets that cleanup. What you'll normally see is that fuel dilution will then drop at the subsequent oil change. And when that happens, because the fuel dilution went down, guess what else goes down? Wear goes down. So it's not that the fuel additive is preventing wear, it's that the fuel additive is cleaning the injectors. Therefore, you get less fuel dilution. Now the oil works better because it's not as contaminated, right? You're lowering contamination, right? So if you're using a top tier fuel all the time, then you're less likely to have a problem. If you're, unfortunately, if you live in Florida and you're using 87 octane in Florida, they put a ton of MMT in the oil. We regularly see 10 to 15 ppm of manganese in used oil samples from vehicles in Florida, because the 87 octane fuel in Florida is probably really about 83 octane, and they're putting MMT and ethanol in there, and they're boosting it up. And what you see is that tends to actually, impact things longer term. So that's the trick, right? And this is what's wonderful about this data, is that we can tell you that what we see from the data, there is no statistically significant difference when you decide to augment your oil. If you put something in your oil to try to make it better, it's not helping.
In that key wear metric, which is, I think, what we all want to do. So gasoline, we've covered in some detail. We've talked a lot about the metrics that we're using and how we're doing it. We're going to shift to diesel in the near future. But I wanted to end with high customer base Porsche vehicles. Again, no difference in Porsches. So this is the most observations. And of liquid moly.
The majority of our customers are Porsche owners, right? So we've been doing this stuff, for the Porsche community. I'm a PCA member for almost 8 years now. So we have like I said, statistically, we have the highest number of samples of that one make. So based on that, we can see that this is the group that we have the most data on for one make. And we also know that this is the group that has the highest usage of additives, right? And statistically, So this is your highest confidence level.
And it's intended to show you that even if something is, a super amazingly engineered vehicle, that using a quality engine oil alone can be enough. And so,
and that's a great point, because every one of these Porsche owners are using a high quality oil. Like we don't see samples of people using budget no name brand oils in Porsche engines. You're getting the liquid mollies, the Motuls, the Drivens, everything. You're getting all the high end boutique brands are all being used here, right?
And speaking of brands, the liquid moly brand. So looking at the percentage, you may recall about 11 point whatever percent of the liquid moly adding stuff to your engine oil. They also added stuff to the liquid moly at the greatest proportion. And so again, the liquid moly alone, it's just fine. So again, we're not trying to throw shade at any brand, any person. We're trying to just let you make a good decision based on big data and modeling, and making sure that you have the tools and the information to make a good decision.
Right, and it's a perfect example, because we get a question all the time, and it was, I think, it was in the chat earlier. What about using Ceratec? What about using, a moly additive, MOS2? What does it do? Here's your answer. Here's what it does.
Right, and again, when you think about MOS2 as an example, moly disulfide. From a formulator's point of view, adding sulfur to something that has sufficient sulfur, that's back to the psychology of adding good to good. do you really need that? And a lot of times in formulating oils, you recognize that there is both a threshold of actually doing something, and then you see that it didn't do more, and you get that level across that it didn't change. So again, think wisely about what you're considering, and recognize that engine oil is well formulated.
Absolutely.
So what does it say? Engine protection with quality filters. Oil drain interval got to match the vehicle odometer. Like you spoke to that. More frequent oil changes during break-in and at end of life. Using great products to minimize ring sticking, and also minimizing fuel dilution. And we don't see any beneficial, and we don't see any harmful wear effects. So again, that's the gasoline data. So with all that background, we'll go a little faster through diesel. Here we have 2,900 rows of data. So that's a lot. Wide range of vehicle brands, models, applications. We're talking Class 8, motorhome, you got it. We process the data to get those key metrics, and we look at the customers and read the comments, and we use software to do that. And then a person check to make sure, and did they get all the possible additives? Oh, there's another one, there's another one. So again and again, that finding that augmented classification took a lot of time. And here's the pie chart that shows diesel owner augmentation. Now it's quite a bit different than the gasoline.
Big change, right? Yeah, big change.
Fuel additives, 21% in diesel. So we got 75% here, 21% here, in oil, and then both. So big change, and we'll bring that out here with a table. Does the brand or the application change the augmentation? And I think we all recognize in our community, most of us have heard about the Bosch CP4 fuel pump concerns. And if you look at the fuel additive color, this color, you see boom, 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 boom. These are all CP4 diesel fuel pumps. And you see why does it matter? Well, there's a problem with USA ultra low sulfur diesel fuel and the Bosch CP4 fuel pump. And so Chevrolet dealt with it, GMC, Chevrolet, and they said, not anymore. And so from 7 forward, they are not using it. And so Ram was stuck with it for a while, but most recently they have stopped, and only Ford trucks have maintained the CP4 throughout. It's a complicated issue. It's something I've dealt with in fuels engineering as well as here with the engine oil. But what's happening is that pump manufacturer and the designers expected a certain amount of lubricity in the fuel, and that lubricity would protect the rotating metal parts. And sadly, the ultra low sulfur diesel does not have enough lubricity.
So I can speak to this real quick. If you go get standard diesel in the US, the ASTM, which is the group that sets the specs for fuels in the North America and pretty much for us, most of the world follows it too. The ASTM spec for diesel oil in terms of lubricity, and that uses an HFRR, a high frequency reciprocating rig test. The minimum wear scar is 520 microns. Okay. And every time we've gone and bought retail ultra low sulfur diesel fuel, it's been right at 520 microns. But Bosch, who makes the CP4 pump, says that wear scar needs to be about 440, you know, or 420. It needs to be quite a bit less, right? That's the issue. So in an upcoming video, so the next 2 videos on the channel, so that's going to be April 4th, April 18th. April 4th is going to be on fuel additives. Fuel additives, engine oil additives. We're going to show what is in many of these popular additives and what they do to your oil when you add them. You know what they're doing to the engine today, but we're going to show what they actually do to the oil, positive or negative. And then the next video is going to be on diesel fuel additives. things like two-cycle oil, ATF. What do these things do to the fuel, right? Are they able to reach that lower, smaller wear scar that Bosch is saying you need? And when if they do, what else happens, right, along the way? So we've got stuff related to this coming up in the next month or so.
Looking forward to that. If we compare gas to diesel, you'll see that's the biggest difference. Oil additives, diesels are a tick higher, fuel a bunch higher, and of course, no additives at all, down. So just remember that our data today, we're speaking about engine wear. We're not talking about the high pressure fuel pump and the benefit of fuel additives with those known lubricity issues. So we're not commenting on those, and we recognize, as Blake just said, that if you don't protect that CP4 pump well, bad things happen. So again, it's just for your reference here. Model terms, very similar to our gasoline. So you see the top 5 of vehicle odometer, engine oil viscosity, fuel dilution, and 2 forms of contamination. But I thought you all would probably enjoy looking at a couple others. These are specific for diesels. One is called a bypass oil filter. And so in our comments, we can read about people who say, I installed a bypass oil filter. And so with the magic of, the software, we're able to pull that information out as a factor. And we also measure soot as part of the used oil analysis. And what soot is, you think, well, that's that stuff that I clean my grill off with soot every chance I get, because my wife yells at me because she wants her burgers to, not be dirty. But believe it or not, in an engine, soot is unbelievably hard, meaning physically hard, like it will wear steel. I mean, it's amazing.
Yep.
So what you have to remember is when we say soot, we're not talking about Dick Van Dyke going down the chimney and using a broom and getting rid of it. This stuff is hard, and it's combustion created particles that are retained because of blow-by. So it's complicated. A lot of this stuff is like 2 and 3 things have to be true to have a problem. But with all that said, those factors we're going to look at so that we carefully can study that augmentation and the key metric and the log transformation are the same. For those of you who don't know what a bypass oil filter is, I thought I'd spend just a minute. If you have a filter that's full flow, it may not be able to filter very, very small particles very well. Well, let's just put a very small particle filter on that, right? Well, then you starve the engine, because the filter would have to be about as big as a semi-truck to actually have the capacity to flow enough to feed your engine. So the bypass filter is actually a second filter that actually deals with super small stuff as an auxiliary or additional. And they call it a bypass because it's not in the main oil circulating system. It's taking a portion and bypassing that just enough to filter and then bring it back to the oil sump. And Lake, if you have any comments on that in your racing days, those kind of things.
Oh no, this is bypass filtration is extremely common in industrial settings, especially with very large hydraulic systems where you could have 20, 30, 40,000 gallon sump sizes in some systems. And so the idea is like, you don't want to change the oil just because it got dirty. So you want to do the very best job you can at cleaning it. But like you said, that very, very fine filtration is going to cause a high level of flow restriction. So therefore, you really can't make that work when you need high flow. So you need your full flow filter that can, we'll call, capture the big stuff. And then your secondary filter, that bypass filter, is going to clean the fines. So that way you're keeping that oil super clean. And this has been added, to diesels to help address the soot, right? So especially when you said soot's really abrasive, it causes a lot of bore polishing and other wear issues. So that if you're trying to go longer drain intervals, the best way to do that is by adding this system. So, thank you for the cup of coffee. I appreciate that. You guys are awesome. So this is really cool, right? We understand the concept of bypass filtration. It's going to be interesting to see what does the data say didn't move the needle at all, right? Because we know the additives didn't move the needle in gasoline engines. So I really want to see what bypass filters do in diesels.
And we know how important contamination is. So here's another kind of a wow, 4.6% of the diesels reported bypass filter use. Unbelievable. And that's super cool. It speaks to that desire to protect the expensive investment in a diesel engine. You pay a big premium for the diesel. You want it to last a long time. But when you look at this table, with bypass filter, you're also a bunch more fuel additive use, and you are also much more oil additive use. So this is not intended to, again, be critical of any decision anybody's making. It's just reporting what we can see, that with a bypass filter, we're also seeing upticks in the use of additives in both fuel and oil. And so it's more likely. So granted, it's a huge investment when you get a 3/4 ton or a 1 ton pickup with or a Class 8. So looking at engine age, odometer buckets, this speaks to the same phenomenon that we've talked about a lot, but if you will, allow me to look with me here at, oh my gosh, you're at 1.3 million miles. Yes, some of our customers are actually Class 8 tractor trailer guys. So this downward, now we just don't have information that says it's about to go back up because these vehicles last so long. So this is the same kind of thing, that early in the life of the vehicle, bigger, more wear, and as the vehicle continues to be used, it continues to reduce overall wear. Surfaces become smoother, etc. So those extreme distance vehicles, they can last, 4 million miles. So
and that tracks exactly what we saw with the wear on the 500,000 mile engines from the Restore and Protect thing. Those things were just super low. So it had 500,000 miles, man, maybe it's broken in. It's just going to be low.
So with that odometer, again, in the data, we're accounting for that. Engine oil operating grade in diesels is 20, 30, 40, or 50. Fewer observations of 50. And so here you see practically no difference in operating grade compared to a gasoline engine. These vehicles, engines are built different. They do look like, as we expect, a thicker oil in a very high compression engine. A smidgen better if you look at the data, but it's statistically not that different. So viscosity does matter, as we all know in the community. Fuel dilution.
I'll go back real quick. So I do want to make a little comment here.
Sure.
On the 3.0 liter Duramax, the Baby Max, right? I mean, I'm just going to throw out what I see, because we get a lot of these samples. I worked on probably 5 or 6 of them just yesterday. The 0W20 Dexos D, the AC Delco, the factory product, typically gives us the highest wear. When we see that wear rate per 1,000 miles, we typically see the highest on that, especially, again, early in engine life. These are the ones that are under 50,000 miles. That number is typically pretty high. When they go from the AC Delco and they go to, say, the Mobil 1 ESP, 0W20, or maybe AMSOIL or something else, it's the 020 Dexos D, it typically gets better. We have had some customers that still aren't happy with those results, right? Because they typically are higher than what we normally see on other diesels. Because the Mobil 1 ESP line, with the exception of the 5W30, take 5W30 Mobil 1 ESP, take this out of the equation. The 020, 030, and 040 all have the same additive chemistry. They're using, if you look at the additive levels, they're all PAO ester blends. So what you really are seeing is only a change in viscosity. And I would say that little trend you see right here, where it gets slightly lower from 20 to 30 to 40, that fits exactly what we see when customers with a 3.0 liter go from Mobil 1 0W20 Dexos D to 030 to 040. It follows that line almost exactly. It just gets marginally better every time. It doesn't go crazy, but it does. I wish there were more 50 grade diesel options, because I feel like there are some people that do some pretty extreme diesel stuff that they would need that, but there's just not a lot of 50 grade engine oils that are diesels that are available. So
yeah, and viscosity matters in so many ways. So we see that here. The data doesn't allow us to say it's statistically that critical, but it's absolutely true. One of the comments questioned on our filtration discussion: does filtration affect the additives? And as a formulator, I can assure you that those molecules are so small, and they're so very much atomically attracted to the metals that we're not talking about filters affecting additive components for EP wear, all those kind of things. They're just too small. So filtration won't change that. On fuel dilution, if you use the same scale as you do on a gasoline engine, the data doesn't look quite the same. But if you expand it, you'll begin to see it's exactly the same as an engine. It just happens to have a whole lot more potential for fuel dilution because of the incredible compression ratio of a diesel engine. So here you are at 14% fuel dilution in some of our samples, which is just amazing. And you see this little inset graph here, how non-symmetric, these are called skewed distributions. And you see that most of the time, you're quite low, but you do have occasion to get higher and higher fuel dilution. And if you look at all these dots, you'll see, there's some people that got a problem. So as fuel dilution reaches very high levels, the wear increases, as we showed in the gasoline.
Yeah, we see some samples. I mean, I probably once a week or so we'll have one come in that's over 15%, where they've just got a really big problem. But this follows what we kind of see, is that when it gets up over 7, 8, 9%, that's when you see the wear start to come up. And so anytime you get over 5% fuel dilution, that's a warning flag that you need to start taking some corrective action, because if you let this go, it will turn into a problem.
Yes, and that's part of the hope of the Motor Oil Geek channel is to share with you these kind of boundaries and go, I need to watch this and take action.
Yep.
Looking at our external contamination again, silicon 0 to 4 parts per million, all the way up to 84 to 206. Same story with diesel. More is bad. Get your filtration good for external contamination. Once again, this is accounting for odometer, so it's not related to the silicon that's present in the engine oil as an antifoam package or that kind of silicon. It's more a measure of what's getting into the engine oil itself. So contamination hurts. Now we'll look at soot. And so this is a graph that shows what happens if you have increased soot in your engine. So this is the percent of soot, and this is the log of wear metals per 1,000 miles. And so as expected, the more soot you have, the more wear you have. Again, soot is this non-symmetric, it's called a skewed distribution. So most of the time it's down here, but when you have a lot of soot produced, and you do, these are all individual observations of people's engine oil, and you see someone had 5% soot. You've got to be kidding.
That's bad.
And so, we're looking at data very carefully and studying it. And you see, when you see this distribution, we better take that into account. And so we do have that in the model. So increasing soot causes increased wear. Absolutely, as all the SAE technical papers say. What does a person do? Fuel injector cleanliness may reduce soot. And so with diesel engines, it's important to keep your fuel injectors clean. When you do, and I have experience with this, with field trials at all sorts of places overseas, here in Virginia, the cleaner your injectors are, the less issue you have. You have increased fuel economy and you have less wear. So anyway, keep those injectors clean. So this is kind of different than gasoline engines in a way, because This is incomplete combustion, which creates soot, and it's a complicated reaction, and it's a very hard particle. Gasoline engines don't typically have that. And now with internal contamination, again, the same kind of a graph. There's a threshold for internal contamination. Here it's at about 50 particles per milliliter with a diesel engine. So the reason that's different is they're bigger sumps, they're bigger oil, crankcases in a big engine. But you see the same problem of if you don't control your internal contamination through good quality filters, wear just jumps right up. So no change there. And let's look at bypass filter. Oh my gosh, does it have a bypass filter? Yes, it does. What do we see? Lower wear. Amazing. And it's just what you'd want. 4.6% say we added a bypass filter, and it sees a benefit, which is great. Reducing the number of particles per milliliter, lower wear does result. So this bypass filter is actually dealing with this. And so you see what it's doing. It's changing how many particles exist in a particles per milliliter range, and bypass filter is making a difference.
Mic drop there. All the internet speculators, right, who said bypass filters are junk or they're good, but here's the data.
Here's the data, and that's something. One of the things, of course, that we are focused on today is augmentation, same as gasoline. And you see with modern and balanced engine oil formulations, we don't see anything. They're statistically no different. So again, I'll caution, we are not commenting today on protecting your CP4 fuel pump. This is engine wear.
Right, exactly.
I want to make sure you all don't take away that, fuel additives are bad. That is not what Chip says today. Fuel additives can be helpful. So what matters, and again, these, nerd-like charts here, I apologize, but I thought some of you might like this. What we do when we see factors, we say, did it matter? And so we swing over and look at this column, and you can see that in general, age, contamination, and the bypass filter all show statistically a difference. So when you look at those that I've lined out, those statistically don't show a difference. And so that's how we are able to share with you with some confidence that stuff actually matters. So engine protection, got to do it. Bypass filters, something you might consider. Maintaining effective combustion, and by that we mean fuel additives and keeping those injectors clean, and making sure that you recognize that with that complicated engine oil additive balance, we can't see any beneficial or harmful wear effects. Neither way. So we're coming to the end. I know you guys are probably going, when is Chip going to stop talking? Here we go.
Well, I think the thing is that you mentioned about the fuel additives, right, and the effect on the CP4 pumps. And I mentioned it earlier, so I'm just going to say it again. Not the next video, April 4th. I think it's April 18th is when we're going to shoot to have the diesel fuel additives video. We did a collaboration with the Repair Geek. I think his video came out maybe last night. That's got some of that data in there. If you guys want to go see that, check it out. But the April 18th video, we're going to be a deeper dive on fuel additive contribution to lubricity, and what does it do using that ASTM test that's part of the diesel fuel spec. We're going to be able to show, okay, here's what Bosch recommends. Here's regular diesel fuel. Here's regular diesel fuel plus a whole bunch of different additive options to see which ones are actually able to get you to that point where you can have the CP4 pump protection that is required. And we're all doing that at the prescribed treat rate. And one of the things I mentioned in that video, I'm going to mention it now. If a little is good, more isn't better. Don't put more fuel additive in there. Just put in what they tell you to, right? Just don't overtreat it. Okay. So I'll shut up now.
No, this is good. This is good. So I think, Lake has said for a long time that augmenting your engine oil with some kind of chemistry is, in his view, not a benefit. And I think, with his data and our ability to look at the data, you can see why Lake says that. He has that innate awareness from just doing all of those analyses and seeing the data on a daily basis. And now with our big data and our statistical number crunching method, we can actually say with certainty, we don't see a difference. And we don't see a difference that's either beneficial or harmful. But we wanted to offer some cautionary words about using augmentation. And like you mentioned that in your Rust and Shore and Protect video.
And that's it, right? So the wet belt, right? So the number one thing is the seal issue, right? And so when you talk about the wet belts that are in the Baby Max, where they're in the EcoBoost, when you're putting in an additive that does not have to pass that seal material compatibility test, right? That's one thing we need to say. No additive has to pass any API materials compatibility test or engine test or any test at all, in terms of an industry standard test to be sold. There's no threshold that has to be met. So when you're putting in an additive into your engine oil and you have an engine that has these materials in there, you don't know if that additive is going to adversely affect the material or not.
You don't.
You don't.
Those tests are really hard and take a long time. Sometimes they're 6 months of duration. And that's why people don't do it. It takes too long to learn.
Right. And the other thing too that can come into this is that reduced oxidative stability. If you put in, say, an additive that contains an ester, and I know people love esters, and all my Bob is your guy people, I'm sorry, I'm about to hurt your feelings. Esters are really cool chemistries, but they're not pixie dust. They're not gold. They don't just always do everything good and nothing bad. NP343 is a 4.3 centistoke TMP polyol ester, has incredible lubricity. It's got great pressure viscosity coefficients. And by the way, it is not thermally oxidatively stable. It falls apart like that in a PDSC test, right? Even though it's used in jet aircraft engines and all that, that's great. But by itself, it can have other issues. So all I'm trying to say is that if you put in an additive in your oil, it can, and we will show this in the future video, just so you know, I'm not just going to speculate, right? We're using science, not speculation. It can lower the oxidation stability of the oil. We've seen that, and we'll show that in a future video, and that because of that, when you begin to lower the oxidation value of the oil and make it where it oxidizes faster, well, now there's potential for deposits. Or you're putting in an additive like MOS2 or MODTC that actually can lead to increased deposits by itself. Right. So there's all these issues. And then just other things you don't know. You just don't know what the synergies of these things are going to be. And it's also important to understand that, let's say you're putting in some kind of nano additive. Well, the dispersant in your oil doesn't know that that nanoparticle is there to help. It just sees it as a contaminant and it's going to try to bind it up. And so you can easily overload, fill up the dispersant package, which is designed to keep your engine clean. And what happens when your dispersant basically package gets saturated, then it basically will just drop everything out of suspension.
Exactly.
And then you get all these deposits everywhere in your engine because this supplement that you use to augment your oil to try to help it is actually now caused deposits because of that. And these are the things that can happen. Again, I'm just speaking from 20 years of experience of doing these things, that this is just what we see, right? And then, of course, your filter capacity, right? There's the more junk you put in the oil that the filter can filter out, now you're shortening the life of your filter, right? And that's not a good thing. And you're just, in some cases, you're putting in an additive that doesn't contain anti-wear, antioxidants, and those kind of things. So you're actually kind of depleting the additives that are designed to protect the oil from degradation, to protect the engine from wear. So these are just the things, right? I mean, I've said it over and over again. I beat this horse to death that you shouldn't put anything in your engine oil, that formulators work really, really hard. They spend years and years and years and millions of dollars to formulate an engine oil so it will protect your engine. You shouldn't go monkey with it and throw something in there because you feel like if I add something to it, it's going to make it better. I think that you've seen from the data presented today, and this is data that's come from this community. You know, viewers like you have sent us the oil, right? And we've got a significantly, 8,000 samples. That is a statistically significant database to pull this from. And it says that augmenting your engine oil with whatever kind of thumping you want to call it makes no statistically significant difference. There's only risk, no statistically significant reward, so don't do it.
That would be our caution. And we hope today from our discussion at the beginning where we learned about the engine oil and how hard it is to formulate, remember that if you see test data from a purveyor of augmenting fluid, most often that test data is a bench test or a rig test. Rare occasions it might be a vehicle test. But remember, that's never been integrated with the full engine oil licensing test. And that's the big risk because you just don't know. So again, when you look at bench data and rig data and you look at any of that stuff that a person might offer, they are trying their best to help you with something they truly believe to be a benefit. But our caution to you is remember that it cannot actually tell you the entire picture. So, and that's our show and tell for today, Lake. I've come to the end of how many slides we've gone through. I so appreciate everybody just watching and commenting. You know, it's fun to watch the comments come in. I feel like I'm in a group of people that are like me. So this is a lot of fun.
No, you are, right? That's the great part. We've got this awesome community where people, they care about their vehicles, right? Because that's the only way you care about motor oil. Let's be real, right? You care about motor oil because you care about your car, or motorcycle, or a boat, or whatever this motorized thing is that you find pleasure and enjoyment from, because you can go out there and go fast or go where you want to go and do what you want to do. If you're a car guy or gal, your passion and love for that vehicle, the sound of the engine and all that, that's what leads you to want to maintain and protect it. So the interest in oil, in fuel, and additives, and filters, and all the stuff we talked about today, and all the stuff that's going on in the comments is because we care. And so, as opposed to operating from speculation, we've got this amazing community. And thank you so much, Chip, for joining the community and being part of it, that we can crowdfund real data, do it the right way. Because essentially all of your vehicles that people are using speed diagnostics to do their own analysis, we are our own test fleet. And then we can share that data back with everybody and say, here's what's going on. Thank you so much for the super chat there. Run GBP, that's cool. It's awesome. We have a great community, and we're able to do things that have never been done before because of this. And I thank you, Chip, for doing this work. Thank you guys and gals for watching, supporting the channel, supporting speed diagnostics. This is just so much fun. It gives me so much joy to be able to, contact independent research labs and say, hey, I want you to go run these 10 additives and do all this. And it's like, oh, it's $20,000. Okay, no big deal. We're going to do it because we have this community of people that are making this kind of stuff possible. And this is just cool, right? I think we're just I think we're just getting started, Chip. I don't think this is even the peak of the mountain. I think we've just started to begin the climb, that there's a whole lot more stuff to come ahead, but because of what this community is enabling all of us to do by collective resourcing, right?
Right. Indeed. We appreciate everyone's time today. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share. I love reading the comments. I wish we could all sit in a room and just talk, but we recognize the reach the channel has and the ability to tell you guys as much as possible in as short amount of time as possible. Thanks for putting up with the statistics. I can almost say that correctly now after all these years. And I hope you recognize my hope is to help you make good decisions based on data.
You did an awesome job, Chip. Thank you again so much for these analysis. And we're going to do it. We're going to keep doing it, right? We're going to keep making cool videos. And as we find questions and we have a chance to dig deep in the data, we're going to find that and come back and continue to do live streams like this where we can just go deep, right? Because this is the best way to do it, right? When we get a good little nugget of data, we can get in there, we can do the analysis and come out and do like this. So I think this is going to be the new future, hopefully, right? Is that every once in a while we keep this coming and keep it going. And again, thank you, Chip, for doing this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned. Those next 2 videos are going to be pretty cool. And we'll see you guys in the next live stream, whenever that is. All right. See you, everybody. Bye.